So I want to start off just reminding you a couple things about Hebrews. Jeb mentioned some of them last week, but I want to kind of set the framework so we know what we're reading. So first, remember, Jeb talked about how the book of Hebrews is essentially a sermon, right? And what we're looking at this morning is the introduction to that sermon. So if you've ever had speech class, you remember they tell you you're supposed to tell them what you're going to say it, then tell them what you said, right? So these verses, the writer's going to tell us what he's going to say. And in fact, everything that we're going to look at in Hebrews from now until we're done really is going to come out of these first 4 verses. It's going to be either expanding it and showing in more detail or an application or something. It's going to come from these 4 verses. Second thing, and this is kind of fun to think about. So the first 4 verses, when it was originally written, were one massive continuous run-on sentence. In fact, if you look at it, depending on what translation you use, generally you have 3 or 4 sentences in English, and even that, they're fairly complex, awkward sentences. But when it was written, it was just this one beginning to end, and you were allowed to do that. It was actually a tool that they used to help communicate, and the reason was kind of like this. Now, have you ever had maybe an in-law or a friend that when they get talking and they get on a roll, you can't get a word in edgewise? Right? You're thinking about somebody, I know. And they go and go, and you can't even respond because they just keep talking and they keep going. So the writer actually is doing that deliberately right now. He has this point that he wants to make, and when Paul was writing Romans, a lot of times he'd say something and say, and you might say, well, why do we even do anything if God is sovereign, or why this? The writer of Hebrews doesn't do that. He's on a roll, and he says, I am going to get my point out, and I'm not going to let you catch a breath to ask any questions about it. We are going to get this point. And so we're going to look at one sentence today as it was originally written. So I want to start here, and it says, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. Now let's stop there. I don't want to lose track and just kind of gloss over that and keep going. Think about how God did that. I know for me, when I read a lot of the Old Testament stories, my response is, I want to live that. I want to see these things that God did. I mean, imagine, so Moses, right, he was born to a slave nation, but then he's adopted by the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And so he is brought up in luxury, but he's also trained in the best leadership skills that they had. And he's on the fast path for success, and then there's kind of a combination of some things that were going wrong in Egypt and some honestly pretty dumb things that he did. And he finds himself running for his life, and instead of that life, he's living on the edge of the desert caring for somebody else's sheep. And he does that for a long time. Have you ever had one of those times when you knew how your life was going to go and it didn't go that way? And I wonder how many times Moses was sitting there remembering what it was like when he was living in luxury and all the plans that he and other people had for him and saying, God, what are you doing? And then there's this burning bush, and God tells him in real words, this is exactly my plan for you, right? Moses, I have heard the crying of my people, and I'm going to save them, and I'm going to use you to do it. And so you are going to go back, and you are going to say this to Pharaoh, and he's going to respond this way, and then you're going to say this, and I'm going to give you power, and then I'm going to pull you out. That much detail, that specific, at that point, you can like the plan or not like the plan, but there's no question. God said, this is what I want you to do. And there are times that I find myself jealous, thinking, man, what would it be like to hear that way? Or then later on in the story, right, Moses does go back. They leave Egypt, and Israel finds themselves where they're coming out, and there's this area of geography where they've got a mountain range on the one side, and it kind of makes a triangle where they've got the Red Sea on the other side. Not a little, you can swim across kind of a lake, especially when you've got 1 million people. Oh, and you've got the Egyptian army right behind you, and they're trapped in there, and they start crying out to God, and they go, God, what are you doing? And God says a couple things that I just love. The first, he says, right, look around. The Egyptians you see today, you will see no more forever. You will not see them again. This is going to end today. Oh, and God says, by the way, you don't lift a finger. You just sit and watch. I'm going to defend you. Have you ever wanted to hear God say that? Maybe we've never been in that kind of a conflict, but certainly we all live in conflict. And have you ever been looking for God to just say, all right, I'm going to end this decisively today. And you don't need to do anything about it. You don't need to lift a finger. You just sit back and watch. I'm going to do this today, and it's going to be over today. And I think, wow, to hear God say something like that and to know ahead of time this is exactly what he's doing. Or Solomon, he's getting ready to be king, and God gives him this dream and just says, Solomon, what do you want? I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to try to set you up for success. What do you want? Or other times when Elijah, he's getting ready to die, and God tells him, oh, by the way, when you go, you're gonna go out in a chariot of fire. It's easy for me, maybe you're not like me, for me it's easy for me to read those stories and kind of be a little bit jealous, like, and I want to see those things. I want to hear God's voice in that way. I think Hebrews knows we have a tendency to look back in the past with kind of that longing look in our eye, and so he says, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. And so our immediate question then is this better or not? Right? It used to be all these variety of different ways, and now he's speaking to us in this one way through his Son. And in fact, when it was written, it wasn't, the wording, it doesn't say through the Son, it just says spoken to us through Son. Like Jesus is his own language. He is this whole new way of communicating to us. But remember, he's not stopping to come up for air, so we don't get to ask the question yet. He's just going to keep going. And what follows, he's going to give us 7 reasons why Jesus is better than all these ways that God used to talk in the past. People always tell me I'm hard to take notes for. Today is easy, 7 points, all right? And because I have 7, I want to make sure I don't get them out of order here. So first, God says, number 1, he appointed him heir of all things. Why is Jesus better? Well, first, because God appointed him as the heir to all things. When we think about inheriting something, I think very often what we think about is the brat with a rich dad, right? Kid that doesn't need it, and all of a sudden he finds himself holding millions of dollars and doesn't know what to do with it. And that's not really the picture that the author had in mind. That's not really the way that it would have been understood. The closer picture of how this would have been understood when he said it is more like, I know some of you guys have ranches or farms that they've been in the same family for generations, right? You just know it was great-great-grandpa Fred, and then this person and that person, and that's what he's talking about. By right of relationship, it's not just that he has become in possession of wealth, but he has been given authority over this entire ranch, or in this case, all things. And so imagine when you're on one of those ranches and you hear a message from one of the hired hands, it can carry authority, right? If the owner told them to give you the message and you hear it, then that carries weight. But so much more when you hear the one who is going to be owner, because, yeah, they're the one, they're getting ready to inherit this whole thing. They are the family. They're the one that really they own all things, and so they tell you, then it carries more weight. Almost like you can like or not like the president, any president, but if you hear a message from the press secretary, it carries less weight than you hear the same message from the president, right? It's a different thing. And so he says, God appointed him heir of all things. Think about all things for a second, because Jesus is the one person that can look at anything in all of creation, our whole universe, and say, yeah, this is mine. Don't care what it is, any object, anything, any person, this is mine. Because God gave it to him by inheritance. And so, you remember when we talk about we talked about last week, and he says, in the past, God spoke through all these different ways, but now God has spoken to us, right? We have God continuing to speak, speaking to us by the one who, first point, just by virtue of his inheritance, he has ownership of all things, and he's the one speaking to us. The second point that he has there is that not only is he the appointed heir of all things, but through him also, God made the universe. We think about that idea, Genesis, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It says, and God said, let there be, and God said. And John, we look at John 1, it says, Jesus is the Word, right? And we're not going to get into all of that, but Jesus was the method by which God created all things. He was the one that did. And so ownership, not just by inheritance, but now also he's having a second point. Christ has ownership of all things because he made it. So if there's a document and you try to write the whole thing, they would say you're plagiarizing because you didn't write it. You don't own this. Somebody else wrote it. And again, for all things, everything in all of our universe, Christ can look at it and he can say, this is mine. Why? Well, I made it and I inherited it. Right? These two things back to back where God is saying, the one that's speaking to you is greater than the ones that were speaking to them in the past. Goes on and he says the third thing. It says the Son is the radiance of God's glory. So the third reason, why is Christ better? Why is this carry more weight? He is the radiance of God's glory. Now I want you to really think about this word for a second. So the radiance, it doesn't just mean it's like he is a mirror that allows us to see God's glory. When he says he is the radiance of God's glory, he's saying he is God's glory. So you remember in John, Jesus is talking to the disciples, and he says, I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I'm going to come and receive you to myself. And he ends up with saying, and you know the way. And they say, we don't know the way. And Jesus says, I am the way. He doesn't say, I will show you the way, or I'm going to help you figure out the way. He says, I am the way. And then it goes on, and they say, well, if you just show us the Father, then that'll be enough. And he says, you don't understand. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. And so when he's the radiance of God's glory, he's not just the means by which we see God's glory. He is the glory of God. He is the glory that we're looking at. And so when we hear this word from Jesus, when he speaks to us, we are hearing the radiance, the one who is the glory of God. And so he's saying, this is better, this is greater. You want all these other fun things that happen, and there are some exciting stories. We're saying, this one who's speaking now, he is the radiance, he is the glory of God. And then he gets to, of the seven, the one that is his primary point right now. And he says this, Jesus is the exact representation of his being, of God's being. Right? So he is the owner by inheritance. He's the owner by creation. He is the one who is the glory of God. And then he says he is the exact representation of God's being. That word that was used there, exact representation, it had a number of different uses, but one that's interesting, when there was an imprint made on a coin, right? So we look at a penny and we see a president on there, or you have a dollar bill and you see a president. That was the word that was used there, and it was, we say, who's on this coin? Well, it's Abe Lincoln, or who's on that coin? That was one usage of it, except it would not be the exact representation. It would just be the representation. And when this is saying he is the exact representation, it is going back to, we're getting more and more specific. He wasn't just the one that inherited. He wasn't just the one that created. He wasn't just the one who is the glory of God. He is saying he is God. Philippians 2, it says, Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be held on to. And this is carrying that idea that he's the exact representation, the perfect, if you've seen me, you have seen the Father. This is not separate. This is not two different things. So why is it better? Because right now you're hearing from God. Would you rather hear from a prophet or from a dream or or would you rather hear directly from God? And now he's going to shift gears just a little bit. And he's going to start bringing this whole thing back in again, because up until now, with the exception of this one, he is God, we have learned about Jesus has this right because of who he is. But we still could have in the back of our head the picture. Sometimes there's the one that they inherit something, but they're really not worthy of it, right? The brat kid that they inherit millions of dollars, and it was their parents that worked hard to get it, and they don't even enjoy it, they don't use it. And so maybe would have in our head, so what about that? Because, okay, he's got it by relationship. So now he's going to talk about his actions. What does he do? And so the next one that he says there, he says, sustaining all things by his powerful word. This actually connects back to when it says the Son is the radiance of God's glory. This is connecting those two together. How is God's radiance seen in Christ? How is Christ the radiance of God? Well, he is sustaining all things by his powerful word. Now this word sustaining, it's not like the old mythology where you've got Atlas holding up the world and just kind of, sustaining it, holding it up. It's not like a weightlifter that's got to just hold the weights over his head. It's more like, if you think athletics, and they're on a drive, and then there's this one player that they really step up, and they're the one that's sustaining the drive, right? We have maybe a quarterback that, because they're just incredible passing, when it started maybe floundering a little bit, they sustained it. Why? Because they kept driving and driving and doing it. Jesus has, by his word, the power to sustain the plan of God. So we live in a world right now where you don't have to look around very long to realize God's plan is under attack, right? It is. We could have examples all day long. I think it's pretty obvious that it's true. And we might ask the question, so how is this not off the rails? How is it that we don't just cash it in and say, well, it was a good plan, but it didn't work? And it's because he's saying Jesus is sustaining all things by his powerful word. He's continuing it on. He's carrying it on. He is bringing me to this end, so that when Romans talks about the one who began a good work will carry it on to completion. Philippians says the one who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. Or when Romans says that those who initially were called, they will end up glorified. How do I know that's going to happen? Because Jesus is demonstrating the glory of God by sustaining this plan through the work of his power. Goes on to the next one, and it says, after he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. This is, of the whole list, this is the one that most gets me excited. And it connects to Jesus created all things. So what is he doing with this creation that he made? Right? We read the Bible, and it took about 1-2 chapters before this creation that initially was good is a complete disaster, where the creation is living in rebellion against God and is fighting against God and is marred and is broken and impressive creation, right? Good job. And he's saying, not only is Jesus sustaining the plan of God, but said, and this is number 6, Jesus provided purification for sins, and then he sat down. And the word there is important, purification, not just, he does provide forgiveness, but that's not the word that he used here. He does redeem things, that's not what he is talking about here though. He says, provided purification. Have you ever been maybe in the kitchen making a meal and you accidentally put something bad into the dish? After COVID, I don't smell right now. Just don't. I was cooking not too many weeks ago, and there was a package of meat, been a little bit too long, and kind of got a little bit stanky. And I didn't know it. Couldn't smell it. It looked fine, and so I'm cooking away, and then I've got family members coming downstairs saying, "What on earth is that smell coming out of the kitchen?" And initially I'm thinking, "Oh, yeah, it's supper." No, that's not supper. Don't know what it is, but that is not supper, right? Have you ever tried to purify something like that? Oh, don't worry, I'm just going to put a little extra seasoning in. We'll be fine. We'll put some gravy on that. It's all going to be good, right? How are you going to purify it? How are you going to... That's what he's talking about here. This creation, there was a complete and utter disaster when we look at it. It says he purified it. He fixed it. How did he do that? Well, as we walked in the door, we got a big sign, we do it all for the sake of the gospel. The reason that we're here, the reason that we're singing the songs is because I've experienced in my own life where he was able to take a mess and purify it. He was able to not just, well, you're still a hot mess, but I'm not going to judge you for it. No, I'm going to purify it. I'm going to start fixing this. And he died not just so that we could avoid hell, even though I'm kind of thankful for that one. He died so that we could be purified, saying, all right, we're going to fix this. We're going to fix this once and for all. We're going to get this where we can be right again, the way it was supposed to be. It says when he was done, he sat down. Right? It was the divine mic drop, right? That's ball game, we're done. I have purified it, I have fixed it. We're maybe waiting for the end, but we're done, this is over. He created it, and then he fixed it. He's worthy because of his position as creator. He's worthy because of what he did as purifier. And then he comes around to number 7. And the last reason it says, and so he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. Or basically, he earned the name that he inherited. So he has shown by all these things that not just at the beginning by virtue of who he is in relationship, that he inherited it, that would have been enough. Not just by virtue of ownership because he created it, although that would have been enough. Not just by virtue of his being the one who is the radiance of God, even though that would have been enough. But also by what he did, that he is sustaining the plan of God right now. He's worthy. He is in his character worthy because, look, he's here and he's doing it. Because he has purified it. He has bought us back so that we can actually be right with God again. And so he's earned the name. How many of you guys right now are playing football? Anybody playing football? Couple? So I want you to imagine you show up for practice tomorrow. You got the team out there ready to go. You've got your coaches there. You've got the assistants, all that good stuff. And then Peyton Manning walks on the field and says, hey, I've got a couple of pointers for you. Who's leading practice? Not knocking the coach, right? Coach does a great job. Assistants, players, all that. By virtue of who he is, as soon as he steps foot on the field, we're all looking at Peyton Manning. Don't much care about anything else right now. Why? Because we have one that is greater. He has earned it. He has demonstrated it. He's going to control this practice. That's what the writer's saying here. Oh yeah, maybe we're doing a good job. Maybe there are things that we like, maybe whatever. And then Jesus walks on the field. That's ball game. By virtue of who he is, by virtue of what he has done, by virtue of that central point, he is God. Nothing else matters anymore. And we can maybe pine for the good old days, right? And think about, oh, I wish that I could have a dream, or I wish I could have that. And he is saying, Jesus is better than those things. Or maybe I get in trouble and I'm tempted to think, God, I wish I had a guardian angel right now. And he's saying, why would you wish for something that is less? Why would you want something that is less powerful, less important, less worthy? Why would you rather have that than Christ? When they were teaching me to preach more years ago than I'd like to admit, they said you always make your application an action word. Well, we're not going to do that today. I've never been really good at following rules. But somebody once said that we do what we do because we want what we want, and we want what we want because we believe what we believe. And I could have a million different applications, and they would be good, and we could appropriately draw them from this text, but if you are not persuaded in your mind this morning that Jesus really is all that, doesn't much matter. The changes are not going to stick. We're not going to have any real change if you're not totally bought in. Now, if you're not totally bought in this morning, that's okay, because we're going to have a few months of Hebrews where he is going to keep hammering this over and over again, all right? So you're going to hear it again. But I want you to think just for a second where maybe this morning you came in and, the worship, the singing portion was pretty half-hearted for you. Then I would say that could be a warning sign that maybe you really don't get this. Maybe you don't really understand how great, how worthy Christ is, because if we did, then that becomes the natural response. Or if you're tempted to kind of check out when the word is open and when someone is proclaiming it, and you just kind of, I do it because I want to keep God happy. I'm going to show up in church for a week, and I'm going to, that might be an indication, a warning sign that maybe you really aren't understanding or appreciating how much greater Christ really is. That he really is worthy. Or if you're sitting here and you're thinking, I think God's okay with me because whatever follows that, indication maybe you're not really getting how much greater Christ is. And so my one goal this morning is that you would leave here just with this overwhelming Christ all by himself is worthy. And if we add anything to that, Christ and fill in the blank, we are insulting Christ. All by himself, he is worthy, and he has ownership, he has control, he has taken protection over your life. And so that's the response. Believe him when he says that. In the depths of your soul, look over these things. He really is that great. And then let's trust God for it. Father, this morning, I want to thank you for these words. Thank you that you have given us one greater than the way you used to communicate. That Christ really he has purified us. God, I ask that you would help us then to trust him and to look to him in Christ's name.